Hello everyone. We are in 1933 in Paris. Let's zoom in a bit more. Let's go to the Bec de Gaz bar on the Rue de Montparnasse. We see there two people sitting and philosophy is buzzing around them. These two people are Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir. On the table, we see glasses filled with apricot cocktails. Both are enjoying the street view and the glorious hub of Rue de Montparnasse. Enters Raymond Aron. He joins them. But what he would say now would change Sartre's life forever. Aron gets himself seated with his philosophical friends. He has just discovered the name of Edmund Husserl, Brentano, and Levinas, and cannot help but mention immediately to Sartre the famous phrase, the watershed phrase that would lead to the watershed moment. He says, "You see, if you are a phenomenologist, you can talk about this cocktail and make philosophy out of it." Well, Sartre immediately gets up from the table. His interest is piqued. He immediately goes to the bookstore, buys a book on phenomenology, and reads while walking to his office. Cafe. Within a year, Sartre would write a long essay on phenomenology, the transcendence of the ego, and would publish it as a book or a pamphlet almost in 1936. Usually, when philosophers get attracted to a movement in philosophy, gradually with time they start to criticize it and either distance themselves away and forget about it, or rarely does it happen that this new movement preoccupies them for the rest of their lives. Well, the introduction of phenomenology would be like an earthquake for Sartre that would never allow him to go back against it. It is present in La Nausée. It is present in L'être Elonia, which means basically that it is present amongst the foundational principle of Sartrean existentialism. But the question that concerns us today is, what is in phenomenology that attracted Sartre so much so that he adopted this philosophical approach all throughout his life? For this, we need to go back to Brentano in the 19th century in Austria. Franz Brentano published a revolutionary book entitled Psychology from an Empirical Standpoint in 1874. Anyone who wants to know phenomenology must read this book. It is the first text students encounter in the Introduction to Phenomenology course in the university. In this book, Brentano formulates his famous intentionality thesis. But before understanding this thesis, we need to understand the context under which this book was written. Later, Husserl, about whom we will talk in a while, would relentlessly complain about the obsession of the scientists and philosophers with the empirical mode of thinking. Brentano was Husserl's teacher as well as Freud's teacher. His lectures were the most famous when he taught at the University of Vienna. Notable thinkers flocked to his lectures, and his students kept a journal of his lecture notes by their side that have now become an important part of Brentano's oeuvre. The problem that troubled him the most was the invasion of empiricist thinking in the domain where it has no place. Since he was most interested in psychology, which was emerging at the time as one of the most advanced and exciting fields, he could see that the way we understand the mind is not adequate to the subjective depth present in our experience of the world. That is to say, there was, and unfortunately is, too much stress upon the objectivity of the human subject. The mind was considered an object that can be tweaked and analyzed as a collection of chemicals in a laboratory. This he called empirical or experimental psychology. He conceded the fact that there are some usages of looking at the mind in this way, but it is a form of scientific reductionism that has causality as its cornerstone. Biologists are obsessed with physical causation. A causes B. Therefore, if A is sickness and if we can take care of that, then it would not cause B. This skewed focus on causality was missing the rich arena of subjectivity, or the first person perspective as it came to be called later on. Brentano wanted to do away with this causality mechanism, and rather than getting stuck in the explanation of cause and effect, he proposed a new way of thinking about psychology, which came to be known as descriptive psychology. In descriptive psychology, we are not so much concerned with the logical relations of the soundness of the arguments and cause and effect, but more so on the description of the functioning of the mind, of the structure of consciousness. How is it that the mind works? Now, if we take this approach, Brentano proposes that we would find teleology at the center of action in the mind. Think about it yourself. If I ask you, what are you thinking? The real question, or shall I say the complete question that I'm asking is, what are you thinking about? That is to say, when we say we are conscious, we must add of what? About what? Consciousness is always directed towards an intentional object. Remember, we are not concerned here with the biological explanations. We are just trying to explain how is it that our mind works. This way of thinking came to be known as descriptive phenomenology. And the very first concept that comes out of this kind of analysis of mental phenomena is intentionality. Brentano emphasized that mental phenomena are characterized by intentionality, which means that they are always directed towards an object. For instance, thoughts, feelings, and perception always have a content or something they are about. There is no love without something being loved. There is no hatred without something being hated. There is no thought without the object of thought towards which it is directed. You might be thinking, how is this different from the experimental psychology point of view? For this, I would suggest you to put this intentionality thesis in front of a doctor and see what would be the reaction. He would not even care a dime for it. This seemingly innocent concept of intentionality would upend the philosophical world. And Brentano himself said this, that this is nothing new. Aristotle had already explained this earlier. But the undue focus on the empirical, observational, and experimental side of psychology did not allow this concept to see its heyday. And now is the time to grasp it and make philosophy out of cocktail. I mean, Brentano did not say that, but Aron did. This was the birth of phenomenology proper as we know it today. Apart from intentionality and descriptive approach, Brentano also emphasized upon the role of inner perception to properly study the structure of consciousness. Each one of us can be a phenomenologist. You need not go into a university to learn the art of analyzing your inner perceptions. For example, the veracity of the intentionality thesis is experiential. We can verify it by just turning a critical eye towards our own thoughts and seek it for ourselves. Brentano would then go on to further expand upon this theory and classify mental phenomena into three main categories: presentations, judgments, and phenomena of love and hate. This classification aimed to provide a systematic understanding of different types of mental acts. But now it is time to leave Brentano and come a bit closer to Sartre's times. Brentano provided the breakthrough idea for phenomenology, but it would be his student Husserl who would actually formalize it and write innumerable manuscripts that still remain unpublished, formulating the proper way of doing phenomenology. So let's talk about Husserl a bit. He was by profession a logician, a mathematician. He was mainly interested in philosophy of mathematics and logic. But as we somehow understand it, he was more interested in the meta-analysis or phenomenological analysis of the laws of logic. The paradox at the heart of his thinking about logic was as follows. We cannot derive any logic without assuming the rules of logic. Therefore, when someone says that he or she is a logician, he or she has unassumingly assumed the laws of logic as divine and unquestionable. But when a logician starts to scrutinize and analyze the laws of logic themselves, which means that he makes laws of logic as the intentional object of his thought, he now enters the domain of phenomenology because he is outside the ambit of causality and logical laws and more concerned about describing how these laws function. But why stop there? Husserl then goes on and posits that since we can do a phenomenological analysis of laws of logic, why cannot we do a phenomenological analysis of the intentional structure of consciousness? This was the crucial step when Husserl challenged and consequently moved forward phenomenology a bit. Because Brentano had provided the key concept of intentionality to break away from the objective empiricism of experimental psychology. Husserl then turned upon intentionality itself and said, wait a second, there is still a lot to be done regarding the description of this descriptive phenomenology. It may seem fancy and eye-watering that finally everybody can analyze one's own thought and become a phenomenologist. But there seems to be three stages of phenomenological analysis of the intentional structure itself, or any other structure for that matter, that must be in place to conduct this analysis. So basically, Husserl described how to describe the intentional structure present in each one of us by virtue of being a human. Before even going on to the stages, we need to first ask some simple questions. To reiterate, there is no mental act without an intentional object. So first question. Since experimental psychology take the given object as it is and assume it to be real and concrete, etc., how do we approach an intentional object in descriptive phenomenology? Here Husserl takes a Cartesian turn and says that Descartes was right when he began his analysis in Meditations with doubting everything, or as Husserl would call it, bracketing everything. This is a very subtle line that we are crossing now, because just a little misstep and we fall into dross idealism, where nothing exists but the mind, which is the vulgar way of saying what Berkeley proposed. But Husserl is smarter. He says that yes, we have to doubt or eliminate everything, but three elements: the intending subject or the mind, the intentional object, and most importantly, the constitutive elements and characteristics of this relationship between the intending mind and the intentional object. So for example, if I am thinking of a unicorn, we know that the intentional object is imaginative or unreal, but it does not negate the intentionality thesis, just that the intentional object becomes imaginative. Let's make it simple. If you are listening to me now, your intentional object is the sound. In this case, the intentional object is real. This also does not pose any challenge to the intentionality thesis. Ontologically speaking, phenomenology is not so much concerned with what the object is. It is more concerned with the ontological structure of the intentional object, i.e., what the object would have to be. Husserl's analysis is like Kantian transcendental argument. Given that X is the case, what necessary and sufficient conditions should be in place for X to be the case? Given the fact that intentional objects could be real or imaginary, how can we describe the structure of intentionality such that we always think about something? Phenomenological analysis saves us the energy required to prove the reality or unreality of the intentional object. Yes, ontology does bring in many complications to it, but of the descriptive kind. This is different from orthodox idealism because there is no denying of the reality of the world. We are just concerned with the description of the world as we perceive it, think about it, feel it, judge it, which can only happen if there is a synthetic relationship between the intending subject and the intended object. And for this, we need to dive deep down into the subjectivity of first-person perspective, which at times is misunderstood as dross idealism. Now, what are the three stages proposed by Husserl necessary for any phenomenological analysis? The first stage is called phenomenological reduction, or epoche, however you want to pronounce it. This is the stage where we have to bracket our quote-unquote natural attitude, which is the prejudiced attitude of common sense and science. Remember Cartesian doubt. In the same way, we have to bracket out all the transcendencies posited by the natural attitude. Transcendencies is a fancy word for prejudiced, non critical baggage of beliefs and claims that we have regarding the intentional object. By the way, Husserl is so critical of this that he even includes the reality of object as a transcendency. So we have to suspend all of this baggage of uncritical attitude. That's the first stage. Now, the second stage. The second stage is called eidetic reduction. This is where the pure essence of perception gives itself to our pure intuition. Now, that's a mouthful. For this, we need to know what exactly is meant by the pure essence of perception and pure intuition. The pure essence of perception, according to Husserl, is the result of the first stage, where we have reduced, remember, we were doing phenomenological reduction, where we have reduced the intentional object to its pure essence. It can be said that the pure essence of perception is the essential form of the intentional object, almost like the Platonic form in which that object partakes. It remains to be decided, by the way, what is actually left of the phenomenon after the first stage. Where should we stop and all that? But anyways, that is the pure essence of perception. Now, what is pure intuition? Pure intuition in Husserl's phenomenology is the direct, immediate awareness of phenomena, enabling the apprehension of their essential structures without the mediation of concepts or empirical observation. There are many interpretations of this definition of pure intuition, and I won't bore you with that, but you get the point. The essence has to be pure, i.e., bracketed out, and the intuition has to be pure, i.e., immediate. This is the second step, which is of utmost importance because the key element in eidetic reduction is the establishment of a pure phenomenological relationship between the subject and the object. The third stage of this analysis is the most crucial one, and it opens up the door for philosophers like Sartre, Heidegger, who was, by the way, Husserl's student, and Merleau-Ponty, to really explore the world in a novel manner. This was a major step ahead of Brentano, who stressed too much on a priori part and did not flesh out much of the synthetic part of experience, which is culturally and socially embedded. So the third stage is to discern the manner in which objects are constituted in cognition. While discussing about phenomenology until now, we have not mentioned the fact that no man is an island. No analysis of man can bracket out the importance of the cognitive context with which the mind perceives the world. But this stage is not culturally dependent. It is a stage where we are looking at the structure of pure intentional act, purified of all the social and cultural baggage. But interestingly enough, even at this last stage, there are certain key elements that influence intentionality. That's the key. This is philosophical. We are not concerned with psychological laws, but the cognitive act of the mind. These may include coextensive acts like that of agency. No matter how pure the act, there must be agentic power that makes it possible in the first place. In the same way, there are some fundamental, essential, or pure, however you want to put it, phenomenological elements that cannot be bracketed out. And this is where we reach the analysis of the pure or reduced object, which is the ultimate aim of phenomenology. There are critiques left and right of this approach. Husserl has been targeted by many thinkers, like Heidegger himself did not help but go against Husserl in many ways. And then Sartre would also enter this field and add or subtract according to his will. But everyone agrees upon one fact, that the phenomenological method of inquiry is really a remarkable achievement in philosophy, which was running dry because of analytic philosophy in the 19th century. Voila! Now you can make philosophy out of apricot cocktails. Thank you, everyone.